Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're sitting here in Austin, Texas on the first day of December.
It is.
And the wonderful...
It's the first of the month, you know. What is it? The Bone Thugs in Harmony always comes to mind.
Wake up, wake up.
Yeah, that's it.
We're sitting here with Mr. Jeff Wilson, co-founder of Kasita, which is an urban development startup really working to change some major social problems. Jeff also goes by an alias known as Professor Dumpster, where he actually developed that because he spent an extended period of time, almost 1 year, living in 33 square feet in a dumpster down here in East Austin, and took a lot of things from that experience that really helped you kind of transition into what you're working on right now. But I guess for some people that are kind of tuning in and aren't as so familiar with your background, maybe you want to kind of start us off with kind of how you got into the dumpster game. And
well, it was sitting at a coffee shop similar to this. This is probably 2.5 years ago, and thinking about my life and where it had gone. And there really wasn't any kind of brilliant plan. I think this is sort of the course of the chaos of my life. I looked out into the parking lot and saw a dumpster and thought, you know what, I really need to live in a dumpster. Not really sure why. Called up my most sane, reasonable friend in the world and said, Yvette, I want to move into a dumpster. Please talk me out of it. And she said, I think, it's on. And a year and a half later, I was moving into the same make and model dumpster I saw in the parking lot of that coffee shop. So.
Wow.
Who knows, I spy a recycling container over there. Maybe you and I could make that into a little bit of a duplex.
We can bunk up. That's funny. Now, so you did your postdoc work at Harvard, and you did that in public health, correct?
That's right, yeah. I was studying, if you know, these large pots that you see often in West Africa of women usually stirring a thing called banku, fufu, all day and being exposed to particulates, different types of air pollutants, but from the coal in the wood as they're stirring. We were studying the effects of that, and also some of the disparities between the rich and the poor areas in sub-Saharan Africa. So yeah, wow. It was interesting.
Is that kind of where you were getting more aware of the issues that were kind of at play? And kind of getting you more into that dumpster transition mindset and kind of building to that earlier on?
I think, as important as going over there and studying health and well-being was just the ability to see how folks lived elsewhere in the world. And in Accra, where I was, one of the big urban centers in West Africa, you see a lot of the issues with housing and the ability to have a roof over one's head, a pretty basic human right. And that was one of the experiences that sort of led to where we are today.
Wow. And kind of transitioning into, like, you're just now moving into the dumpster. Can you kind of tell us, like, what was going through your mind and getting ready and prepared for this? I mean, did you actually take an actual used dumpster? Did you clean it up and get it going?
Yeah, I mean, the preparatory phase was, first of all, I had to get rid of everything. So I put everything that I owned up for sale for $1 an item. Invited a bunch of students around. About an hour later, everything was gone. And then I illegally lived in my office at the university with a piece of duct tape on the floor that was the size of the dumpster. So it sort of went into full-time training for about a year as I was getting ready. And then there were a lot of mental sort of preparations as well. But yeah, February 4th of 2014, moved in on one of the coldest weeks in recent history in Austin, and then went through a couple of phases and was in there for an entire year.
And I know that's a great point about weather. I mean, in Texas it does get hot. What was the heat like during that time? I mean, you had an AC unit in
At
there?
one point in late July, early August, because I didn't have air conditioning or any electricity for the first 6 months, I think it got up to 132.5 degrees Fahrenheit in the dumpster. You don't really hang out in your living room in the middle of the day when you've got those kind of temperatures, and you acclimatize, not to 132 degrees, but in the evenings it often wouldn't fall below 80 degrees until fairly late at night. But I got to where I could handle it. Humans are fairly flexible and resilient.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And I think one thing that I really liked about the dumpster project is that while you were experimenting with this 33 square feet worth of space for a year and really pushing the limits of human potential, you're really bringing awareness to a bigger issue. One of the things we really talk about on this show a lot and on Something Social, and we do with Gnack is we do a lot of advertising and social media and marketing. I mean, where do you feel that making this type of a stunt, not necessarily stunt, but type of event happen in correlation to its effectiveness and your ability to raise awareness to a pretty, urban development and these types of urban problems that face us?
Yeah, the dumpster was an interesting experiment, and I think the fact that you were transposing two very polar opposite sort of emotional connections in the brain. So on one side you have got the home, right, which is your sort of most comfortable, most safe, most controlled environment. And then on the other end, one of the most powerful human emotions is that of disgust, and a dumpster is pretty much the most disgusting environment that any of us will ever kind of come into contact with. So, we took those two polar opposites, sort of put them into a super collider, which ended up being a 33 square foot box, and then wrapped some purpose around it. Initially it wasn't just a sustainability or urban living experiment, but it was about what we get out of life when we have a lot less. And we literally compressed the space to such a small space that everything just comes into super sharp focus. And even some unexpected sort of things like Kasita.
How did that, how did you kind of bring that up and kind of unexpected? I mean, take us through how that development and process. Before we kind of hopped on the show and recording, we were talking about this idea of a phase 1 and phase 2, where you kind of watched the dumpster evolve, and then we kind of talked about Kasita really being an extension of that. I mean, kind of bring us through where you're at. I mean, you're getting out of the dumpster at this point. In February of this year, correct?
I got out last February,
past
February. So I've been free and clear of the dumpster for a good 6 months or so.
So take us back to that transition point, and then did you work right into Kasita?
Yeah, so what happened was about 9 months into the dumpster, I went back and looked through some of my notes, and it was actually November 15th. I was lying in the dumpster as you do, staring up at the ceiling, and just thought, there are actually a lot of great things about this. By going smaller, I'm able to live, rather than 25-minute commute, a 1-minute commute in the part of town I want to be in, rent slower. I own my stuff rather than it owning me. I can pick up my dumpster house and put it on a truck and move anywhere. And I just started thinking about all those qualities and going, it would be fantastic to have a real home like this. And I jotted down the word Kasita with kind of a few little blocks, and that's where it all began. So you could say that Kasita is a dumpster baby in some sense. Not born, but conceived at least in the dumpster. And I began to kind of work this idea over, and then May 1st I think it was, that I actually left Houston-Tillotson and went full in on Kasita. Yeah.
Wow. And what was that transition like? Like, was it difficult to kind of take the leap and go into entrepreneurship, having kind of coming out of the realm of academia? Or was that like something that kind of was a natural extension and progression of sort of what your journey was?
Yeah, it was an extension of the journey. I mean, I had had some time in a previous life in business, and it really was just sort of paying attention to the things that sort of come into awareness. I think if I would have gone into the dumpster thinking that Kasita was going to be the result, or that I was going to end up some sort of CEO, I never would have seen it. We would have never got there. And so, you do a lot of the same things that you do as a professor or as a scientist or as a nanny or whatever that job may be. I essentially see myself as doing the same things. I'm focused on finding the right people, finding whatever resources we need. In academia, that was grants. Now it's fundraising, and keeping the focus on the North Star. What is the mission?
Mm-hmm. And I guess kind of for people that aren't familiar with Kasita and what you're working on with that project, kind of break down the overall concept and what you hope to achieve in your mission and your vision and overall objective with the business.
Yeah, so Kasita is a new category of, I would say, living. It is a small, about 240 square foot, beautifully designed home that is smart. It's transportable. It fits in the heart of the city. Allows you to move between cities if you want to. It stacks, and most of all, it's affordable. Folks just can't afford to live in the cities that they love anymore. Take for instance where we're sitting right now. East Austin's a really desirable place for folks to live. A lot of the folks working in this coffee shop would love to live around here, but there's no way they can afford it, especially if you want to live alone. You end up with a bunch of roommates you found on Craigslist and, some 4 or 5 cats on the couch and some crusty bong water sort of laying out. And that's sort of the situation you're stuck with if you want to afford it. So I wanted to come up with a solution that would allow folks to, live where they wanted to affordably, and I think that's what Kasita does as well.
Yeah, and what I really found interesting is not only were, at least in the Austin, Texas use case, able to really project at cutting rental rates in half, is what you're saying, but really appeal to this idea of the mobile generation and this idea of the more nomadic generation that you've really seen trending with millennials. I mean, can you kind of give us a better idea of and define of what the really nomadic generation is and what that means?
Yeah, and I want to go back and way back. I mean, prior to 10,000 years ago, we were largely a nomadic tribe globally until we started fencing off land and farming and having cattle. We were nomadic for millions of years prior to that, depending on kind of how far you want to go back into calling us humans. And I think a lot of that is coming back around. People are becoming aware again of the joy and beauty and not being tied into a 30-year mortgage and having a lot of things that really own you instead of owning them. You think about when you first packed up your car and left home, maybe went to college or went off to another place, and it's an incredible amount of freedom not having to be tied down to a specific place. I think there's also a number of trends right now happening globally, especially with the millennial generation, of just wanting to have a whole lot less. And wanting to be really untethered as far as to objects, to places. I think a third of millennials now do not even have driver's licenses. So the whole idea of even being tied down to a car and having to park it somewhere is going away.
Going back to the idea of the millennials being more nomadic, I mean, do you think technology has really been a driver behind that? I mean, Airbnb losing the car, like you said, the technology that's built into what you're working on, and this idea of mobility and being able to access and get on an app and get your house picked up and transferred to a new city. I mean, mobile communications. I mean, do you really see that as a driving force of why everything's kind of coming to a head now?
Yeah, I mean, I remember kind of the early days of so-called telecommuting, right? When personal computers first started getting distributed and people could call in from their landlines on their modem. But all of this really didn't take place until the wider distribution of, I think, smartphones. I mean, you can essentially work anywhere and get a Wi-Fi connection anywhere, where you can get 4G or LTE now. And then the pervasiveness of applications, of apps, and sort of disrupting these industries like hotels or like taxi cabs. And we are going after the largest industry in the world. The largest market in the world is the U.S. housing market.
Really?
And so we are going at what we consider to be a human right to affordable housing with dignity. And that's where we're headed, and that's what we're gonna do.
Do you see that idea of dignity being really coming to a head and manifesting itself in the effort that you put into design?
Yeah, one of the massive lessons learned from the dumpster is, over the course of the year, trying to get to this Uber sort of ultimate dumpster in the sky that popped up and had solar and composting toilets and everything. I worked with a lot of architects and engineers, and it's really hard for them to get out of the sort of traditional way that they were taught. We never really got to the place we want to be, and so I said, I'm going to completely flip the script with Kasita, not hiring any architects or any engineers. I still haven't hired any architects until I find something really beautiful. I want to design something like an iPhone that you can live in. So I went and found the best industrial designer, somebody that makes beautiful things, and asked him to make me a beautiful thing that you could live in. He had never built a house or anything that one could live in before, but I said I didn't care. I said, actually, that's a better thing. We'll get the engineers and the architects to patch up the holes later, but make me something really beautiful, completely deconstruct what the house is and make it. And he did. I mean, the Kasita has... there's nothing I'm aware of out there that looks like it or functions like it. We truly have a new category in a basic human need.
Do you think that was that approach and that process and working with that individual and that design process, is that kind of how we led into the Internet of Things and that the technology that you're integrating into Kasita?
Yeah.
And the idea that things are sort of interchangeable in the...
Yeah, I think about the Kasita as a home, as the smartphone, and all of the things that are going on inside of it as the apps, with a sort of fully integrated interface. One of the other category busters here, and what we're creating that's new, is there are right now no houses in the world that are shipped from the factory, turnkey, ready to go as a smart home.
Wow.
What we call smart homes is usually going and buying a Philips Hue light bulb and plugging it in, and then your Smart Things hub, and then your Nest thermostat, and you've got to go install or hire people to do all these things independently. But what if you could, move into your Kasita, and right when you walked in the door said, "Hey Kasita, play me some Tupac," right? And it brings up a playlist through the speakers. Or, "I'm ready for bed," right? The shades come down, the bed rolls out. And Kasita comes back and says, "I see you've got a meeting at 8 o'clock up at the Domain. I'll wake you up at 6:45. Looks like traffic will be about 30 minutes. There's all kinds of other things we can do by integrating into a sort of where this stuff is all pre-thought out. If you think about machine learning, perhaps a Kasita could learn your sleeping patterns and adjust lighting, temperature, and background noise or music to help you sleep better. I mean, what if a home could be shipped that actually learned the conditions under which you slept better? And we see that folks living in Casitas get 30, 45 minutes more of REM sleep than they were in any other environment in their life.
Wow, that's efficiency.
Yeah, there's all kinds of really interesting things we can do once we integrate that stuff.
It's absolutely fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. And I want to keep us around. We could talk all afternoon.
Yeah,
I
for
want
sure.
to wrap us up with a final good question here. I mean, how important has personal branding really been for you in this process? I mean, you've done 150 different media outlets in this last year and what you've been working on. You've been really kind of coming up with this persona of Professor Dumpster and using that as a really driving force for not only your movement of sustainable living and kind of downsizing, but also what you're doing with Kasita. I mean, like where do you see personal branding kind of fitting into the importance of
my view on personal branding is that people are too focused on the yang aspects of it and of the pushing out into the world, rather than first kind of focusing within and saying, okay, who am I really? And what aspects of myself are sort of most interesting to me and that I am trying to develop, and then trying to really encapsulate that. I think by just sort of taking on this identity and name of Professor Dumpster, which really isn't, I'm not really doing any acting. It seems like performance art, but this was something suggested to me by a UT graduate student that, hey, you should be Professor Dumpster, and kind of a Bill Nye / with Oscar the Grouch, and start calling yourself that. I said, this is the most idiotic idea I've ever heard of. Professor Dumpster just doesn't even sound right. And then I said, all right, we'll try it for educational purposes, and it sort of stuck. So it's being aware of yourself and being willing to kind of shift and embrace that identity, no matter sort of how strange it was. And then it's kind of a build it and share it and they will come mentality. Mm-hmm. We have never reached out to a single media source. Mm-hmm. We have a PR and marketing budget of 0 at Kasita, and we have a video with 9 million views out there. So it's continuing to create that kind of gravitational mass from within of whatever that identity may be. Examine the things you're not really happy with. I've never really liked my name, Jeff. And so actually next November, when I change my passport over, after much sort of consternation, a lot of polling of what I should change my name to, we have come up with the name that I've started using from time to time. We're going to drop Jeff or Jeffrey, and I'm going to be known as, going forward, as Baby Wilson.
Baby Wilson. I was like, drum roll, please. What is that going to be?
So you can call me Baby.
Baby Wilson. You heard it here first.
Everybody loves a baby. My mother told me that nobody loves a 40-year-old adult baby. But yeah, so that's going to be kind of the next thing. I'm going to fully embrace that and change my legal name, if it's possible, to Baby Gaines Wilson.
Oh my
And we'll see if the Professor Dumpster thing sticks around or not.
Oh, wow. Well, you heard it here first. We're out here with Baby Wilson right here. Jeff, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
That's good.
Baby?
Yeah.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Yeah. Thanks so much for kind of filling us in on what you've been working on in your projects, and good luck to you.
Yeah, real pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thanks.